where we left off of with evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. The last video in part 1, we're going to go over Daniel, book of Daniel, and some common questions at the end. Grizz, you got anything?
I just need that countdown. But other than that, playing first Berserker Kazan. But yep, I'm ready. Let's have a good time.
Okay, so in the video before, we were saying that Daniel is post-dated by a lot of critics because of how accurate it is. The accurate description of the Greek Empire, the rise of the Greeks, and Alexander the Great, and how quickly he was going to take over the known world and the spread of the Greek language. And then you also have the dividing of the Greek Empire into 4. It was I can only remember the 2, Ptolemy and Seleucus. I cannot remember the other 2. Alright. In Daniel 7, 13, 14. So here's why Daniel is important. So Daniel has a vision from the angel Gabriel, and Gabriel gives him the timeline. 70 weeks I have appointed to die people. So God is essentially giving the Jews 490 years, very important history. It was 490 years from the rebuilding of the temple the second time. So Artaxerxes gave the command to, was it not Zechariah, but he gave the cupbearer Nehemiah. So Artaxerxes gives the command to Nehemiah about rebuilding the temple the second time. From there, that's when the 490-year countdown kicks off. Why do you say 490 years? Because it's the using the sabbatical calendar, the sabbatical timeline. 1 week is 7 years. 70 times 7 is 490. Because in Daniel it says 70 weeks I have appointed to thy people, to your people. To multiply that by 7 is because of the transgression that they committed. They did something to where it got multiplied by 7, so now it's 490 years of Israel's history. But that's not counting the last 2,000 years, because the last 2,000 years the Bible considers it as an intermission period with the birth of Christianity. The reason why this is important is because Daniel gives a prophecy of Jesus' arrival in Jerusalem, where Jesus would formally enter Jerusalem on a donkey.
Cool.
And go ahead.
I think you're going to get into it anyways. I was going to say, how do you get, because I know where this is going, the 490 years, how come it's not just a straight 490? I think that's where a lot of people would have a hard time with this. Like, oh, we're just going to put a delay on this 490 years?
Well, go ahead.
No, you're good. I think you're going to explain it just fine.
The way the timeline is broke down is Gabriel tells Daniel 70 weeks I have appointed to your people. The reason why it stops at week 69 is because Jesus is crucified. So Daniel gives the time.
For anybody that doesn't know, a week in the year, a week in the Bible, it can be, it's just a how do you say it? It's a time frame. So a week in the Bible can be 7 years. You know, we say a week is 7 days, and that's true. But in the Bible, it's also 7 years. And you get that from, I think it's the book of Jacob, not the book, it's Jacob's story where I first heard that in Genesis. So that's you're not just, people aren't just saying that out of nowhere.
You can find that. You can find that in whenever the instructions for the sabbatical jubilee ceremonial stuff, whenever that's addressed more than one time in the Bible. So you can find it there. Right? The Bible interprets the Bible. Jesus' death is accurately predicted in the book of Daniel, and the day that he formally enters the city of Jerusalem. And you cannot, the only way to with that is to say that Daniel was written after. The latest you can date Daniel is 2nd century BC, which doesn't matter because that's 200 years before Jesus. So how are you going to explain that? And no, you can't really post-date Daniel that far because have the archaeological records that the Greek Septuagint was already in existence and Daniel was in the Greek Septuagint. But according to Grok, he says you assert Daniel's description is inaccurate. The prophecy portrays a divine authoritative figure which aligned with the New Testament depictions of Jesus' kingship and second coming. Common critiques include the prophecy's apocalyptic tone versus Jesus' earthly ministry. Right, so obviously the 70th week, the 7-year tribulation, has not happened yet. And that's the final week that is laid out also in Daniel. It hasn't happened yet. Can't really use that to disprove Daniel's legitimacy off of something that hasn't happened yet. It will happen. It'll probably happen soon if you're watching the news, if you're keeping up with current events, but that's another topic of discussion.
Well, I think that's important too. I think one of the things that people who see Christianity have a hard time with, they're like, you guys have been saying this for thousands of years now. It's right around the corner, right around the corner. Well, it's been 2,000 years. You guys are full of it. So, I mean, that's, but time the way we see it isn't how the Lord sees it, I guess is what I'd say.
The way I think about it is we're eventually going to find out which one of us was right. Like, yeah, you can say that, and you should be grateful that it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, that's another thing. That's a mercy. It's not a punishment, right? It's a wicked world, but that's a mercy. It's not a punishment. It's so that more people have the chance to enter the kingdom of heaven. And the Lord is going to give every person, down to the last one, that opportunity.
Yeah, you can use it to make fun of the Christian faith, but when it happens, don't say that you were not warned. Don't say that you were not given the chance or the opportunity or the time because waited this long for this part of the Bible to be fulfilled. So, alright, moving on to some of the common questions. I needed a thumbnail for my video, that's why you see that. But one of the common questions is that what if the disciples just lied about the resurrection to start a movement? And so let's ask the AI, what if the disciples lied about? Riz, you got anything for that?
The disciples lying about the resurrection?
Yeah, what if the disciples lied?
Well, we spoke on that a lot last night together. Listen, anybody who's ever lied knows you can't have partners in lies. All right, one person can tell a lie and keep it. Two people probably can't even keep the same lie. They can't. Their stories, somewhere their stories will vary. And so when you have all these people telling the exact same story over time, their stories should not differ in any way. And when you get the story of Jesus Christ and the apostles, it does not change. It's the same from person to person. You might get more details from one apostle to the next, but the stories do not change. And that's one way of verifying that they're accurate. And that's where you just got to use common sense.
If you watch the documentaries on the mafia, the mob, all these crime organizations, how were those organizations brought down? Well, of course, you've got the law, you've got RICO and all that stuff, but you know, the one of the main reasons why they're able to bring down these big crime organizations is that not every single henchman can keep their story straight. Just like Griswold was saying, you might be able to keep the story straight between two people, but hundreds of people, because there were hundreds of disciples. There was the 12 apostles, and then you had hundreds of disciples. And everyone that witnessed the resurrection is saying the same story. None of their their stories corroborated each other. But how can you do that? In a legal setting, in a judicial setting, if you had 500 people plus the 12 with corroborating stories that are consistent with one another, you would have to take that as evidence. Right? You cannot dismiss 500 witness testimonies. In a judicial setting, you would never do that. So why would you do it here? You know? You look at the documentary on the mafia, how were they able to bring down these big mafia groups? That's because the henchmen, the lackeys, cannot keep the same story with one another. And all of these little things add up. But with the disciples, all of their story is like, what does Brock say? The deception is unlikely because what was the motivation? There was no wealth, power, or status for them to attest to the resurrection. The only thing they have to look forward to is death, persecution, imprisonment, and martyrdom. Especially if you look at the apostles and the way they were brutally executed. You know, why would you lie fully knowing that that's the only thing you have to look forward to? Peter was crucified upside down. You know, you hear about some of the things that the first century Christians, the kind of persecution they were going through, especially under Nero's. You know, why would you knowingly enter a situation where not only is there no reward, but there is only punishment? Liars typically seek personal gain, not suffering. You had something, Bruce?
I was just going to say, these men weren't just put to death. They were tortured, most of them. Maybe one or two might not have been tortured, but they were tortured, right? When you're tortured, like, likelihood is the truth's going to come out. You're eventually going to crack. And
yeah, everybody has a breaking point.
Yeah, it's gruesome. So these men were put to death in the most vile kind of way. It's like, just think about that. Really put some thought into that.
Then another reason why is something that we've already touched on, is the consistency of their accounts across the multiple sources. You look at the book of Acts, in the very beginning of the book, when you read those first two verses, it kind of sounds like a sworn statement. kind of sounds like a sworn statement, so take that into consideration as well. To coordinate an intricate lie over a long span of time with hundreds of people, you cannot pull that off. You might be able to do it over one thing, one story, but you cannot pull that off across a very detailed account. Cultural context,
today, we even today we like, oh, I call bullshit. Like, if you hear something that sounds like garbage, you're gonna test it, and that's these apostles got tested too, and it was tested and it was verified that they had to be telling the truth.
Yeah, it's not like skeptics didn't exist back then. It's not like scholars didn't exist back then to test these things. When you have high-ranking officials like Nicodemus and Paul switching sides, you have to take that into consideration. When you have Pontius Pilate, he was a Roman governor. He had nothing to gain by declaring Jesus innocent. He had nothing to gain by doing that. He risked his life, his career, just to declare this man that he didn't know, this Jewish man, innocent. He declared him innocent because he knew who he was, right? Pilate admits that, hey, I think this might actually be the king of the Jews. He might actually be the Messiah. Cultural context, starting a movement in 1st century Judea under Roman and Jewish hostility with a whose leader was improbable without a genuine catalyst. The resurrection claim emerged in Jerusalem where it could easily disprove if false. Yeah, so for them to start this movement, to start this religion where they would be opposed by not just one group of people, but another more powerful group of people. The Christians in the 1st century were facing persecution under Rome and the Jews as well. They have nothing to gain by doing that, unless they really believe what they saw, unless what they were saying was true. Psychological implausibility. The disciples went from fearful to bold, facing death for their testimony. Liars don't typically die for a known falsehood. Yep, you don't die for a lie. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Even criminals in mafia organizations, the vast majority of them enter witness protection programs. And under the threat of death row, then they'll snitch. Life in prison, sure. They won't snitch because their families' lives are in danger. Because the mafia will probably go to them and like, hey, if you don't snitch, we'll take care of your family. If you snitch, we'll kill you and your family. And we'll torture them. So yeah, in that case, they won't snitch.
Where do you think you're going?
But the vast majority of them enter witness protection program. Which the point that I'm making with that is there is an incentive for them to not snitch, right? There is an incentive for them to lie or tell the truth. In this case, the Christians had no incentive to lie or tell the truth. There was none.
Bring myself to fight you, my friend.
If they died, they got persecuted and tortured and killed. If they told the truth, they got persecuted, tortured, and killed. Either way, for them to proclaim the resurrection counts against them. The question you have to ask is, if it was indeed a lie, why would they keep it? Why would they keep up with that lie all the way to the grave?
General, you should keep his axe.
Historical counter evidence. even Jewish opponents acknowledged the tomb empty. A lie would have been exposed by producing Jesus' body. Where's the counter evidence? Okay, it's not true, fine. Where's the counter evidence? Is there any counter evidence outside of rhetoric, outside of clever arguments, there counter evidence? No, there's not. And of course, we address the rapid spread of a religion that's beset by all sides. A religion that is an inherent disadvantage. You have to realize how extreme
They say the
of a religion Christianity was. Because there was no practices. There was no idols, right? Most religions of that day, they had shrines, they had idols, they had practices.
Always had a natural talent for magic.
The Christians in the first century did not have that. It was an underground movement, and the majority of the members were outlaws and outcasts.
Ozma taught her how to control her powers.
They said, well, what about the
Of course,
cross?
she looks
I'm
on
not the
him as her
cross.
savior.
Shut
That's
up.
probably why she follows his commands. No matter
Not an
how
idol.
terrible they are.
That's just what they use as a symbol. Okay, we don't worship the cross,
Traitor.
right? It's just something that we like to have. You know, it's symbolic for us.
She'll know something.
And no, Protestant Christianity, right, all the other denominations aside, the purest form of Christianity doesn't really have any practices. We'll have things that we do because we like to do them, like praying, taking one day off once every 7 days, right? The women would wear the head coverings. Those were recommendations. Those were not commands or practices. All right. Another question is, how do you know the tomb wasn't empty for some other reason? Riz?
How do you know the tomb wasn't empty for some other reason? The things that people talk about, right, and that women's voices weren't heard. Well, women were the first to see, and that's logged. That's logged. That's put down. So that's unheard of. And then not only that, this was predicted to happen. So they had people guarding this tomb, all right, which was in a cave, as I know it to be. And those guards, like, if those guards get caught slipping, they're going to be put to death, and it's going to be just like a crucifixion. They're going to be put to death in a brutal way, so they're not going to be slipping. So when this happens, like, it's a big deal. It'll send chills down your spine. It's pretty crazy. And then, well, we'll get into that later. That's just the tomb itself. If you want to add anything to that, go ahead, Strong Lead.
Yeah, that's exactly what the AI says. The historical context is the Roman guards secured the tomb. It wasn't Jews that were guarding the tomb, right? It was the Roman guards with a seal. And the seal is the way they do the seal is like it's impossible the way it's done. It's like it's nearly impossible to do it from the inside. For it to happen from the inside is like basically the way the seal and the way the tomb was open and the way the seal was broken, the only answer you could come up with is that the dead person would have to come back to life, and they would have to open the tomb from the inside. That's the only way you can explain it. I can't remember the exact circumstances, the exact conditions, but basically that's what it was. Jewish claim. Opponents claim the disciples stole the body, implying the tomb was empty. and not empty for some other reason like relocation? How could they steal it? And they already addressed that in the Gospels. The high priest Caiaphas that we talked about, he said, put guards on the tomb. They were telling Pilate, put guards on the tomb, because if not, they'll steal it, and then they'll say, oh, he came back from the dead. Which they already rectified. They already had a plan in place to make sure that the apostles could not steal the body. Alternative explanations. The swoon theory. Jesus surviving crucifixion is not possible. I'm not gonna go into that. That is dumb.
Well, yeah, that's crazy. Just the fact that...
Yeah, that is dumb. People say it.
Yeah, I
People
know. I've heard it. It's just like, what's wrong with y'all? Y'all so stupid. Yeah, you need to be slapped in the mouth.
anything and everything just to deny the truth. The wrong tomb. The women, Joseph of Arimathea, and the disciples knew the tomb's location. A mistake wouldn't explain appearances or mass belief. In addition to that, Joseph of Arimathea was a wealthy guy from that time. He bought the tomb with his own money. The tomb was not government property. Right? So there is records from that time of Joseph Arimathea's purchase of the tomb. So it could not have been the wrong tomb.
And you said this guy was a noble?
Yeah, he was like a wealthy guy from that time, Joseph of Arimathea. And even if it was the wrong tomb, like, okay, fine. People still saw him walking around in Jerusalem. The body was moved. That's another one. Joseph, who buried Jesus, was a respected council member. No evidence suggests he or authorities moved the body, and they produce it to stop the movement. Was the body moved by Joseph of Arimathea? How would he move the body? There's Roman guards. And Joseph of Arimathea was Jewish. The Roman guards would not side with a Jewish nobleman. Makes no sense. Right? Like, why would the Roman guard... I mean, the Roman guards would be put to death. They would be tortured and put to death. So for them to move the body for a bribe doesn't make sense either. You know, because the guard, you have to get past the guards. How are you going to get past the guards? The supporting evidence. Post-resurrection sightings to over 500 people aligned with an empty tomb caused by resurrection, not another reason. Disciples' conviction, their willingness to die for the resurrection. Yep, their conviction. When you have hundreds of people dying for a religion, you have to question that. You have to ask that. I feel like the vast majority of the world, the vast majority of society, when they think of Christianity, they associate it with the mighty Holy Roman Empire, right? They think of the Crusades, they think of the British Empire, they think of the Holy Roman Empire, and they associate Christianity with that. And no, that's not right, because the purest form of Christianity was in 1st century AD and in the Protestant Reformation. And the Christians in 1st century AD and the Protestant Reformation were part outlaw, part scholar, part regular person. They were average people that somehow were intellectually augmented. You call it the Spirit of God, right? Augmenting their capabilities. But for the most part, they were outlaws, and they were outcasts, and they were rejects of society. But they were so articulate and well-spoken, and there's no proof. Like, you can say, well, Paul was a highly trained Pharisee. All right, fine. Well, how do you explain Peter? How do you explain John? You can say Luke was a highly educated medical professional, but he was in the medical field. You know, he wasn't in public speaking. He wasn't a scholar per se. You know, he's a physician. He's a doctor. Now, the next question is, couldn't the resurrection story be a myth that grew over time?
No. I mean, it started at a point. That point dates back pretty historically accurate. It's just pretty much impossible for that to have happened. It's in order to come up with a lie like that for everybody to believe after the fact, like, I don't understand how that would happen. I guess it can happen because you got other religions that do stuff like that. But I almost would say you would have to beat it into the people, because that's what happens with a lot of other religions like that.
Yeah, it's hard to prove, but then you would have to explain how does the New Testament, because the New Testament already addresses the resurrection. You know, James, even the book of James, one of the first New Testament epistles ever written, he touches on the resurrection. So it couldn't have been a myth that grew over time because it was already in the New Testament. And then it was in the Synoptic Gospels. You know, there's writings from the 1st century AD talking about the resurrection of Christ. The resurrection of Christus. They call them Christus. Greek for Messiah. The Greek word for Messiah. Christus.
I saw a large cave not too far away.
Yeah.
And there's a good chance the dark elf.
Then you also have these non-Christian sources that
we have to find her
touch on it.
We're with you.
Even though it's not a go-to source of proof, it's still worth taking a look at. Saying, well, it couldn't have been a myth that grew over time. Then the AI says the Jewish belief, they believe that the resurrection happens at the end of the universe, at the end of time, not individual people being raised from the dead, even though it's in the Old Testament. A myth wouldn't invent a concept so countercultural. That's another thing too. Christianity was very counterintuitive to the religions of the day. Idols, no practices. Nothing. There was no practices. There's no idols. Right? And the resurrection, according to the Jewish faith, happens at the end. Then, of course, the rapid spread and disciples' behavior. Next question. Another question is, what if Jesus didn't actually die on the cross? No, that's not it. We've already addressed that. I've actually heard people say, like, this medical condition where people die, but then it's like not a real death, and then they come back to life later on. But it happened on the 3rd day, so it's, you know, there have been cases of people being declared dead, but it doesn't last for 3 days. You know, because the decomposing process has already started.
And this guy was, at the end of it, he was thrusted into with a spear, javelin, or whatever, and that means he would have been bleeding out for days. Okay, guys, they didn't just tip him with it; they stuck this thing in him,
in his rib, in his lungs. You then you can say, well, what if it wasn't a fatal wound? All right, so he somehow got stabbed with a spear, right? And then he's alive from that. Let's say that. They take him to the tomb. They wrap him up. He's been on the cross the whole time, the whole day. He's got the lacerations in his back from the whipping. He's been beat to hell. Jesus was beat to hell when during his trial. So now he's got these lacerations on his back. He's got the pierce on his side. He's got the dehydration and the malnutrition from being on the cross all day, right? How do you explain him surviving all of that and having the 500 eyewitness accounts?
I mean, if I'm being honest right there, somebody might make the claim, well, he went 40 days and 40 nights without water or food, so...
You can't use that as an argument.
I'm just saying.
He went 40 days without eating.
I'm like thinking, like, what would people say to that? Hey, he did not survive this. He definitely died. But if somebody has to make a claim off the water and the food and stuff, hey, man, if now in seriousness, if the Lord had wanted to live, like, he could have lived through that. He could have, but that's not what was intended.
Right. If he wanted to live through it, he could have.
The idea here is the sacrifice wasn't for himself. The sacrifice was for every single person. The blood was shed so you could be washed, right? This was a sacrifice for your salvation. This, honestly, as dark as this is, from the side of his own people doing this to him, this is a beautiful thing. This is the only reason anybody in this world can be saved.
Right. Because only blood can pay for sin.
And only a certain blood. It's a very specific blood.
That's what the atheists, I think, at the end of the day, have a problem with.
Magic inside the cave.
That only blood can pay for sin. Your efforts to being a good person did not count whatsoever.
Well, I've also heard that...
They don't like that.
I haven't looked into it. I've also heard that death scientifically cannot be explained. It can't be explained. I don't want to get into the ins and outs of that, but definitely heard it.
I'm sure there's like a biological explanation, right? Like your heart stops.
Apparently, from what I understand, there's really not.
There's not?
From what I understand, I watched this whole documentary on it, and then I looked into it a little bit more after that. This seems to be like among scientists, this seems to be something they agree on.
Oh, you're talking about like death by natural causes, right? Like when someone just gets old and then they die.
Right. The aging process and all that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, yeah. That makes sense. Sense.
Well, I just died. But it wasn't natural.
Another question is the prophecies are too vague to point to Jesus. Just like we were saying yesterday in the last video, I can understand if you take a couple of those prophecies in isolation. And yes, it might seem like they're vague, but you take all the 300 statements, but there's more than 300, but I'm saying 300 because those are the ones that I've seen for myself. When you take the 300 and you put them all together, now all of a sudden they're not vague. They're like pieces to a puzzle. You know, when you're looking at the Bible, you don't want to isolate the verses and take it as an absolute. You have to put it in its proper context, and then you have to piece it together and understand the thematic elements and the narratives that are being portrayed. And then you also have to approach it literally, the literal manner. Right? The Bible is not a quick read. People will spend hours and hours writing research papers and what do you call that? These huge research papers on literature that is not inspired by God, and they can dissect it and analyze it to the nth degree. Why would you think that the Bible is different? Even if you don't believe, let's say, okay, fine, you don't believe that there's a God, you don't believe that the Bible was written by the Holy Spirit, was inspired by God. Let's say you don't believe any of that. Okay, fine. Why would you still not approach the Bible as a literature that you can deeply analyze? If you do it through all the other books, why wouldn't you do it to this book? This book is a collection of 66 books, more than 40 authors, written over the span of 2,000 years, 1,500 years. You've got Moses with the first 5 books. The very last book was written by the Apostle John. I think the very last book written was the book of 1 John, 2 John, and 3 John, which 80 to 90 AD, and the books of Moses would have had to been written during 1000 BC, 500 maybe. So you've got like 2,000, a piece of literature, a collection of books written by more than 40 authors, written over the span of 2,000 years. Why would you not take the time to analyze a piece of literature like that? Just because it offends you? Because you don't like what happens? Number one, if you don't believe God anyways, if you don't believe that there's a God, you don't believe that the Bible is true, then approach it like a fiction literature. You know, just analyze it. Why would you disagree with some of the things that God did in the Old Testament if you don't even believe it happened? So what's the problem? You know?
Well, we live in this culture where everybody's got to be right. Even ourselves. This is my best friend, and we don't agree on everything. We have a good understanding for the Bible, and we absolutely know what faith is. We don't agree on everything, and that's individuality. It's okay to be wrong, and people don't want to be wrong. And then I was just thinking a minute ago. I was like, what do you like? Me and you, we read the Bible, listen to it, whatever. I do both. But I've not made it through the whole Bible. I don't understand the whole Bible. But what would you say about all the people who are these scholars and they've read the whole thing and they understand the whole Bible, so they're telling you how to live your life? Well, any thoughts on that? Maybe a little off subject, but
I can't think of anything.
That's
right
fair.
Here. Let's see what the AI says. Maybe that'll get my memory jogging along. With the prophecies, the question that we asked is the prophecies are too vague. They are not vague. In isolation, yes, you can refute them, but when you put them together, now you've got an issue of the burden of proof is on you to disprove that this one guy was born in Bethlehem, grew up in Galilee, grew up as a carpenter from the line of David. Then he got pierced with his hands and feet, was crucified, rose from the dead. You know, you have to, your chances of success, they shrink as every one of these prophecies are tacked on to Jesus. Right? You say, what are the chances that a male born in Bethlehem is possible? Okay, let's say it's like 1 in 500. Okay. What is the probability that a man will be born in Bethlehem and then will grow up in Galilee? Okay, so now you've got 1 in 1,000. You know, your chances just get worse By the time you get to the 8th statement about Jesus, you're at 1 to the 10th by 127th power. You pick out any 8 of them, which is another crazy mystery. You take any 8 statements said about Jesus in the Old Testament, and your chances of success will come out to 1 to the 10th to the 127th power. Any one of them. Any 8. You pick out any 8.
Just so people are clear, the yeah, I think it was like 10 to the 6th or 10 to the 7th power is virtually impossible. So now you go back and listen and you do some of those numbers. Like that's not just virtually impossible. It's just like the fact that we're living today. It's like it's an enigma. It shouldn't happen.
Yeah, that's like you getting up, stepping out of your house, jump into outer space, and grab a particle. Never mind.
You tried.
But the cumulative weight, the 300 prophecies, the odds of one person fulfilling so many specific predictions are astronomical. And the pre-Christian Jewish texts understood these as the messianic Jesus' fulfillment, is not a later Christian invention. Jesus was rejected by the Jews as the Messiah. But all the other statements that's said about Jesus is in line with the Jewish faith, right? It's not like Christianity as a whole is anti-Jew. It's not. It just so happens that our Messiah, Jesus Christ, the Jews, they crucified him. They killed him. So they rejected him. Now that doesn't mean that a person cannot be a Christian. That doesn't mean that a Jewish person cannot be saved. No, that's not what I'm saying. God deals with nations differently than he deals with individual people. Right? The nation of Israel rejected Jesus as their king. However, many Jews got saved and converted to Christianity. Riz, anything?
I want to hear you say that again.
I was just saying, like, just because the nation of Israel rejected Jesus as the Messiah, that doesn't mean that individual Jews cannot be saved. God deals with nations.
So it's pretty clear. The way to the Lord is through the Son. Okay, the Bible is clear on that. Now, also, the Jews are God's people. Period. You read the Bible, the Old Testament. It's bottom line. There is no New Age Jew, we're the new Jews, that sort of thing. I don't know where people really get that from, but Abraham was the first Jew. The Jew is not really a race so much as it is a nation, right? Like, we come up with all these concepts today and make our own thing out of something that the Lord had already perfected. The Jews are a nation, and the first one was Abraham, and God made a covenant with Abraham, and God will fulfill his entire covenant. There's more than one covenant. All right, so this idea, like the Jews rejected the Lord and like they're not with the Lord no more. The Lord's coming back for them. They are. He is. And it's not for you or anybody else to put your imprint on what the Lord has for them. You better be very careful when you talk about a Jew and you say what they have done wrong or done right, because you also are being looked at, and it's faith. Period. It's faith. The Jews did reject God, but that's between God and them. Now we are to preach Jesus Christ to everyone. We are, but it is not our place to judge, at least not yet.
The anti-Semitism is growing in this country, and we've seen it happen for a time now. We've seen it progress. I think it's because I think it's mostly because there are... Never mind. I'm not gonna get into it.
Well, now you're gonna leave them.
But yeah, every demographic has done something though, right? Like no one has clean hands in this life. Nobody. No one in this life has clean hands. So we can't really look at a group of people and say, ah, well, they did that. No, we're all equally terrible. If we're looking in the mirror, being honest, look at ourselves, have to say that not a single one of us has moral superiority over the other. And when you come to that realization, that's like your first step. You are closer to God in that moment than you've ever been. Like if you're an unbeliever or an atheist and you can have an honest conversation with yourself in the mirror and say, you know what, I don't have any moral superiority over anybody. I'm also terrible. I've done many things wrong in my life. You are very close to God in that moment. Because God wants you to come to the same conclusion that He did. He's trying to give you eternal life. There's no other way for the human race to continue. Look at what we've done. You know, we've destroyed the planet, hurt each other, but you have scientists that think that we're gonna run off to Mars or colonize the universe. That's not gonna happen. Okay, well, how much of this planet would we have to consume just to take the next step forward? You know, sure, we created the internet and iPads and PlayStations and all that stuff, but for us to transcend, to ascend as humanity, we can't do it period. You can't even say, ah, well, we could do it, but the cost is heavy. No, it cannot be. And that's the conclusion that God came to in Genesis when He flooded the entire planet. That no, it has to be by another way. Mankind's ascent has to be another way. There has to be another way. I have to give them eternal life through my Son, Jesus Christ. It has to be by. But that's going to be it for this video. Tell Glock to wrap it up.
Hang on this second. Yeah, I got about 7 minutes left. Is there...
The purpose of these videos, this Glock series that I'm making, it's not to be preachy, and it's not to be political, it's purely education. But we get sidetracked, so I have like super ADHD, so I go off on these tangents, but the main point of these is educational. You know, I hear people say, well, there's not enough evidence for this, there's not enough evidence for that. Okay, well, here you... I'm using a tool from something that humanity created to prove this unequivocal, objective truth. Right? So you can't say that there's no evidence. There's plenty of evidence. Of course there is. You know, and it's not for me to be preachy. Not trying to be preachy. It's purely educational. I'm not a Bible teacher, right? I'm not a pastor. I'm not a spiritual leader of any kind. Just a guy that likes to read the Bible and other stuff. Of course, we play a lot of video, but we're not trying to be preachy if we're like better than you or like that. Not spiritual leaders of any kind, not pastors. We don't have some life advice for you. There I go again, going off on a tangent. Rock, the final case for resurrection. Repeats what we've discussed, he summarizes it. But yeah. Riz?
I don't mind going off on a tangent, right? Like if you're trying to get educated and people are talking to you, don't be afraid to listen. If you are, maybe you got something to hide. I don't know.
But yeah, thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Yeah,
Go to GrizzWatch channel.
Ah, shit.
Go to GrizzWatch channel, like and subscribe to his channel.
Yeah, have a blessed night,
Goodbye,
everybody.
everyone.